Faking my own death, the unexpected consequences. I know it sounds crazy, but I genuinely tried to fake my own death. I'd gotten to a point where I felt like I couldn't escape my problems any other way. Everything was falling apart: my job, my relationships, even my mental health. So, when a crazy idea popped into my head, I figured, why not? I could just disappear, start fresh, and leave it all behind. But what happened next was something I never saw coming, and it changed my life forever. I've always been the type of person who believes in solutions, in making things work. But there comes a point when life just piles on so many problems that the idea of escape starts to feel like the only option. That's how I felt a few months ago. I had just gotten laid off from a job I hated but had been sticking with out of necessity. My relationship with my girlfriend Sarah was in shambles. We were constantly fighting over everything, from her friends to where I spent my free time. Then there was the pressure from my family to figure out my life, to be somebody, to make them proud. It all just felt too much. One day, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Ben, who was always the type to joke around but never really take things seriously. I told him about how I felt trapped, how I just couldn't see a way out of all the pressure. That's when he casually mentioned the idea. Why not just disappear? Like, fake your death. Just vanish for a while. At first I laughed it off, but the more I thought about it, the more appealing the idea became. I could cut all ties. I wouldn't have to deal with any of it. I could start fresh somewhere new, and no one would expect a thing. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like the perfect solution. I started planning it all out, thinking about the details that would make it seem real. I didn't have any enemies, thank God, so I didn't have to worry about any revenge or the possibility of someone coming after me. I figured I could stage an accident, a car crash maybe, somewhere remote enough where no one would know the truth. I'd set it all up so that it would look convincing. I could disappear, change my name, maybe go to some quiet town, and work some boring job far from the life I was escaping. I got to work immediately. I started researching ways to fake my death, watching videos, reading articles, and brainstorming with Ben, who kept egging me on, saying that it would be the ultimate escape plan. I knew deep down that this was crazy, but the thought of it being my only way out of the mess I had gotten myself into was too tempting to ignore. But here's where it started to get complicated. I couldn't just vanish without anyone noticing. I needed to make sure Sarah would think I was really gone. She would be devastated, of course, but I figured she'd get over it. I had to cut off everyone: my parents, my friends, my coworkers, and especially Sarah. I couldn't leave any traces of myself behind. So I made the decision to ghost everyone. I began slowly distancing myself from Sarah, and it wasn't easy. I mean, we were still living together, but I started giving her more distance, avoiding conversations, and becoming emotionally unavailable. I knew it would hurt, but I convinced myself that it would be for the best in the long run. That night, as I was packing the last of my things, my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know how I was going to pull this off, but I was determined. The plan was simple: get away, vanish completely, and leave behind a life that had become too much to handle. I thought I was doing the right thing. I even convinced myself that I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was just choosing my own happiness, right? The night of my plan came, and everything was set. I had set up a fake car crash by taking my car to a quiet stretch of road, making sure it looked like I had driven off the road and into a small ditch. I'd even used some of my old clothes to make it look like I had been ejected from the vehicle. I'd staged it perfectly. It was late, and I knew I'd be able to slip out unnoticed. My last act was to send Sarah a text, telling her I'd be gone for the night and that I needed some space. I told her not to worry, but that we needed to figure things out. The message was as generic as possible, meant to keep her from suspecting anything. After sending the text, I grabbed my backpack, slipped out of the house, and drove to the predetermined location. I took one final look at the house I was leaving behind. It felt surreal, but I was too deep into the plan now to turn back. I parked the car and walked to the place I'd hidden my phone, along with the few essentials I was taking with me. I had already arranged for a new identity and had some money saved up. The rest would be easy, I thought. I was ready to start a new life. I left my car running and walked off toward a nearby, secluded trail to meet up with my contact. But just as I reached the trail, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car approaching. In a panic, I ducked behind a tree, hoping it was just some passerby. But when I peeked out, my heart dropped. It was Sarah's car. She had come looking for me. I crouched behind the tree, heart racing, as Sarah's car slowed down. She parked just a few feet away from where I was hiding, her headlights casting a long shadow on the ground. My pulse quickened, and for a second, I debated whether to stay hidden or come clean. I thought about just running, disappearing into the night for good, but I knew that would only make things worse. I had been lying to her, and now she was here, looking for answers. I waited, watching through the branches as she stepped out of the car. She was wearing a jacket, her face pale from worry. I could see her scanning the area, probably wondering if I had wandered off. She called my name, her voice tinged with concern, but I stayed silent. I thought I had done a good job covering my tracks, but she was always sharper than I gave her credit for. I had underestimated how much she cared, and how much she could see through my act. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but it was only a few minutes before she turned to leave. She didn't seem like she was giving up on me just yet, but something in the air felt different. I should have gone to her. I should have walked out from behind the tree, apologized, and told her everything. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my new contact, the person who had promised me a way out of everything. It was a reminder to keep moving forward, not to turn back. I had made this decision, and now I couldn't let anything, or anyone, stop me. But as I looked at Sarah's retreating figure, something inside me started to shift. Was this really what I wanted? Could I truly escape everything I had been running from? Or was I just running further into the unknown? Make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss more shocking and real stories like this one. I stood there, frozen for a moment, watching Sarah walk away. Something in me wanted to call out to her, to apologize for the mess I had created, but I couldn't. I had already gone too far down this path, and turning back now would only make everything more complicated. I needed to keep the act going, at least for now, but that phone buzzing in my pocket wouldn't leave my mind. I pulled it out, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. The message was short and to the point. You're running out of time. Don't let them find you. That was it. The final push I needed. I glanced over at Sarah one last time as she drove off, disappearing into the darkness, before heading in the opposite direction. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to keep moving, each step heavier than the last. The adrenaline that had been fueling me since I came up with this plan was starting to fade, and all I could feel now was the weight of my choices crashing down on me. The further I went, the less I could see clearly. The night was closing in, and I was starting to feel the isolation I'd created for myself. I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't go back to the life I knew. I had cut myself off from everything, and now I was just a ghost, someone who had decided that running away was the only way to solve the mess I had made of my life. As I reached the edge of the woods and stepped into the open field, the weight of the decision hit me harder than ever before. I wasn't just trying to escape my problems anymore. I was running from myself, from everything I'd done, from the relationships I'd broken, from the lies I'd told. That's when I heard it, a voice in the distance. It was faint but unmistakable, a voice I recognized. It was Sarah's voice, calling out my name. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My first instinct was to run, to keep going until I was miles away. But something in me told me to stop, to face what I had done. I slowly turned around, my breath heavy in my chest, unsure of what to do. There she was, standing at the edge of the woods, looking just as lost as I felt. Sarah was standing a few feet away, her face painted with confusion and a hint of frustration. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and the silence between us stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The faint light from her car illuminated her figure, but it didn't make this moment any easier to navigate. "Aren't you going to say anything?" She finally spoke, her voice soft but demanding. "Why did you run off like that? Why did you leave everything behind?" I wanted to explain myself, to say something, anything to make her understand. But how could I? How could I explain the mess I had created, the lies, the deceit, and the overwhelming feeling that I was suffocating under the weight of my own life? I had thought I could escape it all, but now, standing here with Sarah in front of me, I realized there was no running away from myself. "I had to do this, Sarah," I muttered, my words barely above a whisper. I couldn't keep living like that. She raised an eyebrow, clearly not satisfied with my vague answer. "Living like what? A coward? Running away from the people who care about you?" Her words hit me like a slap across the face. I flinched, not because I didn't agree with her, but because I knew deep down that she was right. I was running from the people who cared about me, and worse, I was running from the one person who had always been there for me, myself. I didn't know what else to do, I confessed, my voice cracking. I thought I could just disappear, start fresh without all the baggage. But I didn't realize that I was throwing away everything that mattered. Sarah didn't speak for a moment, her gaze fixed on me. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to piece together the mess I had made. I could feel her disappointment, her frustration, and a part of me hated myself for putting her in this position. "I don't know what's worse," she finally said. "The fact that you tried to fake your death to escape, or the fact that you thought that would make everything better." I stood there, silent. The weight of her words crushed me, but I couldn't deny them. My attempt at escape had only made things worse. And then, in the quiet of the night, it hit me. I had tried to escape my problems, but all I had really done was create new ones that I couldn't run from. The silence between us grew unbearable, like a thick fog hanging in the air, too heavy to breathe in. Sarah just stood there, her arms still crossed, waiting for me to say something. Anything. I was supposed to have all the answers, right? After everything that had happened, after going to such extreme lengths to get away, I should have known how to fix this. But the reality was, I had no idea what to say. "I made a mistake, Sarah," I finally said, my voice barely audible. "I thought that running away would be the answer, that it would give me a clean slate, but all it's done is make everything worse." Sarah looked at me, her expression softening, but there was still a hint of disbelief in her eyes. "You don't get to just disappear like that, Leo. You don't get to leave people behind and think it's all going to be okay. It doesn't work like that." Her words stung, but they were exactly what I needed to hear. She was right. I had been selfish. I had thought that faking my death would give me a fresh start, a way to escape the constant pressure and expectations. But in doing so, I had pushed away the people who cared about me the most. And now, facing the consequences of my actions, I had to confront the mess I'd created. "I know I messed up," I said, feeling the weight of it all. "But I was so overwhelmed, I couldn't breathe, Sarah. Everything just felt like too much. I didn't know how to handle it anymore." She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, her gaze softening as she uncrossed her arms. "I get it," she said quietly. "I really do. But you can't just run away from your problems forever. You have to face them. You have to face the people you've hurt." I swallowed hard, the guilt eating away at me. How could I face them? How could I look my friends, my family in the eye after everything I'd done? After lying, disappearing, and leaving behind a wake of confusion and pain? "I don't even know where to start," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this." Sarah took a step closer, her presence grounding me. "One step at a time, Leo. One step at a time." I nodded, though the uncertainty still gnawed at me. I didn't know if I could ever fully fix things, but I knew that I couldn't keep running. The truth was out, and now the real work had to begin. I had to rebuild the trust I'd shattered and make amends for the hurt I'd caused. "Thanks for being here," I said quietly, my voice filled with gratitude. "I don't deserve it, but I appreciate it." Sarah smiled, though it was a small one. "You're not off the hook yet," she said lightly, "but we'll figure this out, together." And for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could start over. Not by running away, but by facing everything head on. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and uncomfortable conversations. I couldn't escape the faces of the people I'd hurt, the friends, the family, the people who had been left in the dark by my selfish decision. But I also couldn't avoid the feeling that I had made the right choice by coming back. I was finally facing the consequences, and maybe, just maybe, I could start making things right. I had to call my parents. That was the hardest part. They had been devastated by my death. The grief in their voices still haunting me whenever I thought about it. I spent hours just sitting on my bed, staring at the phone, terrified of what to say. How could I explain what I'd done? What if they hated me? But I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to face them. I took a deep breath, dialed the number, and waited as it rang. The seconds felt like hours, each one heavier than the last. And then, finally, my mom picked up. "Leo, is it really you?" Her voice was shaky, filled with disbelief, and yet so full of hope. "Yeah, Mom. It's me," I replied, my throat tightening as the weight of everything hit me all at once. "I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I had to tell you the truth." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her trying to process the words, trying to make sense of the impossible. "Why, Leo? Why would you do something like that?" she asked softly. "We thought we'd lost you forever." "I know, Mom. I know," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't think about how it would affect you. I was just running away from everything, from my life, from the pressure, from myself. I thought if I disappeared, everything would be easier. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." There was another pause, and when my mom finally spoke, her voice was steadier. "You've hurt us, Leo. But you're here now, and that's all that matters." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first step. They weren't going to shut me out. They weren't going to pretend that everything was okay, but they were willing to try. "I promise, Mom, I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I don't want to keep running. I want to fix this," I told her earnestly. And with that, the conversation shifted. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. My parents, though shaken, started to understand the depth of my struggle, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I began to feel like I could breathe again. The next few days were a mix of awkwardness and slow progress. My parents had forgiven me, but I could tell there was still a lot of hurt. They had spent days in mourning, believing I was dead, only to have me show up and confess everything. They didn't know how to feel. Could they still trust me? Could I ever regain their full faith? I spent hours sitting with my dad, talking about life, about my mistakes, and about how to move forward. It was the kind of conversation I never thought I'd have. For so long, I had been running away from my responsibilities, from the weight of my actions, and from the consequences of my choices. But facing my dad, seeing the disappointment in his eyes, was a wake-up call. This was real. This wasn't some imaginary scenario where I could just escape. This was life. "I know you're sorry, son, but it's not enough just to say it. You've got to show it," my dad said, his voice rough but filled with wisdom. "You can't keep running. You've got to fix the damage, step by step." I nodded, but I didn't know where to start. How could I fix something that felt so broken? How could I repair the trust I had shattered in an instant? The next step came unexpectedly. I received a message from Emily. She hadn't reached out when I first came back. She hadn't been part of the phone call with my parents, and part of me had wondered if she had just moved on. But there it was, a message from her. "We need to talk." The text was simple, but it struck me like a punch to the gut. What could she possibly want to say to me? After everything that happened, after the lies, the disappearance, and my betrayal, did she even want to hear from me? I hesitated before responding, but eventually I agreed to meet up. When I saw Emily, I was hit with a flood of emotions I hadn't expected. She looked just like I remembered, but there was a coldness in her eyes that made my stomach churn. I had no idea what she was thinking, what she was feeling after everything that had happened. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "So, you faked your death to escape your problems," she said, her voice surprisingly calm but sharp. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I thought it would fix everything. I thought running away from my life would be easier than facing it. But I was wrong." Emily stared at me for a long moment, as if processing everything. Then she finally spoke, her words softer this time. "You really hurt a lot of people, you know? Not just your family, but me too. We were building something. We were friends before anything else. And you just disappeared. No warning, no explanation. You left everyone behind." Her words hit me harder than anything else. I had known I'd hurt my parents, but hearing it from Emily made it all feel real. I had destroyed the one real relationship I had, the one that meant the most to me. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I didn't think it would be like this. I thought I could just disappear and start over, but it doesn't work that way. I know I messed up, but I want to make things right." Emily sighed, shaking her head. "You can't just erase what happened. You can't take back the hurt you caused, the damage you did." I nodded, understanding her anger. She had every right to be mad at me. I had betrayed her trust in the worst possible way. But, as she spoke, something shifted in her expression. The coldness in her eyes softened, just a little. "I'm not saying that you can't change, or that you can't make things better. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort. And you can't expect anyone to just forgive you overnight." "I know," I replied quietly, feeling the weight of the truth in her words. I don't expect it to be easy. I just want a chance to prove that I can be better, to show that I can make it right. Emily looked at me for a long time before finally sighing. Maybe, just maybe you can, but it's going to take a lot more than words. You've got to show people that you're serious. I felt a small sense of relief wash over me. At least she wasn't shutting me out entirely. There was a glimmer of hope, but it felt fragile. If you've ever been in a situation where you've messed up and tried to make amends, let me know in the comments. How did you fix things? Do you think it's possible to rebuild trust after a major betrayal? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, and maybe even share some advice for anyone else who might be going through something similar. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories and personal journeys. Thanks for reading, and I'll catch you next time.